Disturbing human experiments you've never heard of. The disappearance of patient 604. The video began with a dimly lit corridor, flickering fluorescent lights, cracked tiles, and the echo of distant machinery. A timestamp in the corner read May 9, 1983. 2:14 a.m. The camera shook slightly as a man in a white coat entered the frame. He approached a metal door with a clipboard in hand. The door was labeled with a small brass plaque, Subject 604, no entry without clearance. He keyed in a code, and the door unlatched with a low hiss. Inside was a room barely larger than a closet. On a cot, curled beneath a gray hospital blanket, was a teenage boy, pale, unmoving. Wires ran from his temples to an archaic-looking console mounted on the wall. His eyes fluttered beneath his lids. The man called his name. Eric. No response. He stepped closer and gently touched the boy's shoulder. Eric's eyes snapped open, glowing white for a split second. Then he screamed. The footage ended there abruptly. This video wasn't supposed to exist. It was uncovered in 2017, hidden on an encrypted hard drive seized during an estate sale in Ohio. The owner, a deceased psychologist named Dr. Alden Maurer, previously employed by a now-defunct military contract lab called Project Oriole. But this was only the beginning. In a small apartment in Seattle, 23-year-old Mia Granger sat hunched over her laptop. Her friend Jackson had tipped her off to the auctioned hard drive. He worked at the estate sale and had noticed Maura's name. Mia, a part-time researcher and YouTube documentarian, was always chasing conspiracies. What she didn't expect was how deep this one went. The drive contained dozens of folders, some labeled plainly, others with codes like NCR 010 or Oriole Logs SRV2. Inside were scanned notebooks, thermal images, and low-res surveillance footage. Many of the documents were redacted, but not carefully. Mia unearthed several references to something called the entrancement trials. It appeared to be a psychological conditioning project funded by DARPA in the 1980s, designed to test memory rewriting and emotional suppression in child subjects. The ultimate goal? To create functional dissociation, the ability to split the mind into obedient and dormant layers. In one memo, Maurer wrote, "The children don't remember anything between sessions. This proves Phase 2 viability. However, Subject 604 shows signs of overlap dreamlike recollection. Increased instability likely." That was Eric. But by 1984, all records of Subject 604 stopped. Mia's digging led her to a woman named Laura Bryn, a retired nurse who had once worked at the Oriole facility before it was shut down. She lived off-grid in Montana. It took 3 weeks to convince her to talk. They met at a diner and Laura brought only one thing, a faded Polaroid. In it, a young boy stood beside a mirror. His reflection, however, showed him smiling. In reality, he wasn't. "That's Eric," she said. "But that isn't what scared me." Laura claimed that in the final weeks before the lab was closed, patients started describing identical nightmares. Hallways that stretched forever, voices calling from inside walls, and a woman in white who whispered their real names. Not their given names, but ones they couldn't remember being told. "I started hearing them too," she admitted. She quit the next day. A week later, the facility burned in a reported electrical fire. No bodies were ever found. One of the most disturbing files Mia found on the hard drive was labeled Project Elysium. Reactivation Report, 2012. This wasn't about the past. It was happening again. The report referenced a private biomedical firm based out of rural Pennsylvania that had acquired Project Oriole's remaining research. They were attempting a soft revival of the entrancement method under a new name, Memory Induction for Behavioral Therapy. Their test group? Runaways, foster youth, people with no paper trail. One name leapt out from the list: Ava Whitaker, a 14-year-old girl who had gone missing from Pittsburgh in 2011. Her mother had posted frantically on Facebook, saying Ava had complained of blank spots in her memory and feeling like someone was inside her dreams. Authorities dismissed it as teenage rebellion. But there she was in the footage, tied to a gurney, eyes fluttering, whispering something unintelligible before looking into the camera. and mouthing one word, Eric. After the footage of Ava, Mia couldn't sleep. She began receiving strange audio files through encrypted messages. At first, they sounded like garbled data dumps. Static, digital pops, white noise. But when slowed down and filtered, patterns emerged. Whispers, coordinates. One clip, barely audible, contained a phrase repeated 3 times. He's still in the mirror. She traced the GPS coordinates embedded in the file metadata to an abandoned psychiatric facility in western Pennsylvania, Red Pines Asylum. It had been decommissioned in the late 90s after a series of unexplained deaths among staff. When Mia arrived with Jackson, camera in hand, they found the building half-collapsed, overtaken by moss and silence. But one room on the lower floor was untouched. On the wall was a crude mirror, the same as the one in the Polaroid Laura had shown her. And carved into the paint beneath it were initials. E.W. Eric Whitaker. Mia turned to leave, but Jackson called her over. He'd found something wedged behind a radiator. A VHS tape, labeled only. Back at their Airbnb, Mia set up an old tape deck and played the tape. Static flooded the screen, followed by a timecode. Then the image sharpened. Eric, older now, was sitting in a chair. Early 20s. Same eyes. Same hollow expression. A voice off-screen asked questions. Simple ones at first, his name, the date, the president. But then they changed. Do you remember Ava? Have you seen the mirror? What is behind it? Eric's demeanor shifted. He smiled faintly. Then he said, slowly, they made us forget. But forgetting doesn't undo what they did. We're still down there. The ones who didn't wake up. The tape cut to static. And then one final frame. A wide shot of the underground facility, now overgrown and dark, with rows of hospital beds filled with unmoving children. Heads tilted upward toward the ceiling, mouths open. It froze there. Mia paused the frame. Each child's face was blurred except one. Eric, smiling directly at the camera. Mia posted her findings anonymously on Reddit, under a thread titled, "They Never Left the Facility." It went viral, but 3 days later, her account was deleted. Not by her. And Jackson? Gone. His phone last pinged in Red Pines. No footage from that day survived, not on the cloud, not in backups. Mia remembered what Laura had said. The children dreamed of voices in the walls. She began hearing them too. Faint whispers in sleep, flickers in her mirror. One night, she returned to her apartment and found her bathroom mirror cracked. On the inside, a sticky note was left on the sink. Scrawled in a child's handwriting were just 3 words. You're waking up. To this day, the U.S. government denies any involvement in Project Oriole or its revival under Elysium. But leaked contracts and whistleblower testimony suggest otherwise. Several families of missing children have come forward, claiming their kids had complained of missing time, surreal dreams, and unknown symbols drawn in their notebooks, before vanishing. A few survivors exist, though none will speak. Some claim that the experiments weren't about obedience or memory or even trauma. They were about gateways, that the mind, when fractured just right, becomes a door. And sometimes, when you open that door, something steps through. Eric, Ava, and the others weren't patients. They were keys, and someone is still turning the lock.